So, welcome to the second ever Feedback Musicianship Network event. We look forward to in-person meetings. I really actually am hoping as many of us can get together, and we have the first really physical event in Copenhagen right at the end of November into December. But this is going to be exciting. We've got today, I'll just introduce briefly the two interesting things to hear about the feedback approaches people have taken. So we've got Øyvind Brandtsegg presenting his work around feedback first, and then I'll let after that and a short discussion, I'll let him take the performance, a short discussion he's going to present, and also Semiconductor, who is Ruth Jarman and Joe Gerhardt. They're here for the second half of our event tonight. So those two are each around 45 minutes. And then that leaves us with a half hour within our 2-hour slot at the end, just for an open discussion. So stick around. We won't record the discussion. We're just recording performances and their short question and answer sessions at the end of each. And that will get archived and put on YouTube so we can have a web presence as well. And if you're not on the mailing list, join that. Chris, anything else I should say?
I think that covers it all.
So I will spotlight you, Øyvind, and make sure that everybody is about to get muted. I'm going to then unmute you, Øyvind, because we got to hear you. So any last questions before you get muted? Anybody? No. All right, so how do I do that again? I go participants. There it is, participant list, and I say mute all. All right, now I just unmute you. Øyvind. Hang on.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks so much for inviting me to present. I'm proud and honored to present for this group of people. I'll do a short presentation, and then let's see. Presentation about a little bit about my background and the projects that led up to this instrument that I will use in the performance. I'll play for a bit, and then I'd like to show you some attempts I have made to produce pitch and interval maps for these feedback instruments. I work at the Norwegian University of Science and Technology in Trondheim as a professor of music technology, and I have a group of nice colleagues also collaborating on building new instruments, and a bunch of students participating in this as well. I have background as a performer, and all technical stuff I really just learned out of the musical need when I wanted to have an instrument that was modified and just figured out how to do it. I've also done some long-running sound installations on various outdoor objects and sculptures. The one on the right here called Flyndre started in 2006 and is still running, so that's a 15-year outdoor sound installation. Also, in building musical instruments, I've produced some software packages. For example, the Hadron Particle Synthesizer, which is an open source VST that you can get from particleaudio.com. Also, a live convolver, which allows real-time replacement of the impulse response for convolution, and a toolkit for cross-adaptive processing, so analyzing the sound of one musician to modulate the sound of another. I meddled a little bit with the AI in collaboration with Axel Tiedemann, and for me, algorithmic composition and automation is sort of related to AI techniques in that there's there's some kind of automation and some kind of mechanism that helps us automate aesthetic choices that needs to be done faster than we can do as a performer. As part of this, I also explored orchestration of Colonel Nancarrow's piano studies for church organs. And I found it fascinating with these big instruments and the sound in physical space that helps give a little bit of another perspective on a lot of the sound that we otherwise would produce digitally and in the box. And feedback is one of these things that also, at least the way that I do it, has also a physical component in the loop. And I find it really fascinating to see well, the liveliness of having a physical component in the controller chain there. And feedback, as you all know very well, is exciting and lively phenomenon. And we have this proud tradition of other artists that have paved the way for us. And I think that for me, feedback is this gift that keeps on giving, because there's always more to explore and things that we don't really, at least I don't really understand all of it. And I find that every few years I come back to these feedback techniques, and in the past I've done some feedback sculptures and also exploration of room nodes with shotgun microphones as an instrument. And I stumbled upon bound conduction feedback in an installation where we sort of put the body against one transducer and another part of the body against the piezo pickup, and realized that we also could get feedback circuits going through parts of the body. And maybe there's even some medical applications for that. This year I've done 2 larger productions with the feedback instruments. One was a performance in collaboration with Alex Murray Leslie and a group of performers, where we used this bone conduction piezo techniques to actuate parts of the architecture of the building of the museum where we performed. And I also had this collaboration making a art installation exhibition together with the video artist Jeremy Welsh and painter Pia Wantiang and musicians Thijs Ham and Trond Lossius, which you can see in the lower picture here. And in this exhibition, all of the visual elements in the room were generated by these feedback instruments that we worked with. So that leaves me to my performance. I will use a polycarbonate plate like this with a transducer on it, and I have a piezo microphone on my finger, and when I touch the plate I will get feedback. And let's see if we can make music with this. I'll just switch my camera, and once more, here we go. And get rid of the mic. All right. And then what I'd like to show you now is my attempts at figuring out where to get the different pitches on these instruments. And to show you that, I'll share screen again. And to show you this this attempt at a map, I recorded the sound of the plate on a grid of locations, like a 9x9 grid in this case, and just short snippets of sound from each point. And then to visualize it, used a big red circle for low frequencies and a small blue circle for high frequencies, like this, and then the rainbow of colors for the mid-range notes. The reason why I wanted to use circles was to be able to see sort of the topographical connections in each direction, from side to side and front to back of the plate, and to help me remember what sound was the source of each of these analysis. If I click on the map, I will hear the sound made by that location on the map. And also as a tool to sort of intellectually sort this information, I found it useful to use a representation of pitch class names, where we can see which notes these frequencies correspond to. Of course, the frequencies are not in the tempered 12-tone scale, but anyways, we can hear some of the potential there. To be able to further enhance the sort of the topographical shape, I also used a coloring scheme. So if there's two of the same note, I give that square a color corresponding to that pitch class. And here we can see that there's a roughly symmetrical pattern. And when doing these measurements, I put the transducer exactly in the center of the plate. And I did this, I mean, that's not the most exciting place to put it, but I also did it to look for the symmetry that I would get, because also any lack of symmetry here would indicate the errors that I made in measurements, because it's me as a human moving my finger around the plate, so it won't be exactly exact, but still we get some idea of what's possible, and the general layout of pitches. I found that with this there's a slight tendency to have a higher pitch in the center, and it's around a minor third or a major third from the edge to the center for the lowest fundamental. Also, in trying to explore, well, which points on the plate might be more interesting to explore, I wanted to look for the intervallic relations between the components that I found. And this is my made up visual representation of intervals. And I wanted to have very simple graphics for low integer relationships, so simple intervallic relationships. So when there's no line, there's just unison octaves. If there's a horizontal line, we have a fifth, or actually a fourth, but we invert them to get from the fourth and the fifth counts the same in this way of looking at it. And then horizontal line are thirds. So a minor third is the lower part, and the major third is the upper part. And then more angled lines for half-tone steps and minor and major seconds. And there's even a special dotted line for a tritone. And in this map, I can, in addition to the sound recorded, I can also play the resynthesized sound here. So this represents what the analyzer found. And if I play that further up on the circle, the balance between the partials are equalized, so we can hear all partials equally loud. So there's a way to explore there. And let's see if we can find one of these more interesting. This one should be nice. Almost like a major third something. And then these more odd ones over here. And one without the fifth. Here. So then I've used this map to try to learn the instrument basically, and to well, when I try to play, first when I play and then analyze and then come back and I try to play the instrument from the map and see if I can reproduce what I would expect to find from the map. And as you know, with feedback instruments, sometimes they change a little bit, so it's not always possible, but a lot of the time I can reproduce what I find on the map. And those times when I cannot, it's also, I find that this process acts as a reflection for me as a performer to then try to understand why I cannot replicate it. And if I can replicate it, it gives me confidence that maybe I actually know a little bit what I'm doing. So then one of the problems with this approach is that you hear that I play only like single notes, and as you heard when I played the instruments, there's so much more to be found in each spot, and I haven't really figured out how to visualize that in a map. But I've started. I will show you one, just a spectrogram thing on one location on a plate where I did a longer exploration. So this is like a 1 minute recording, where at first I find this one fundamental here, a B, and I can bend it a little bit upwards, and this is by changing the pressure on my finger. And then if I push even harder, it jumps up to another fundamental. And then these three is this sort of the same vibrational node, I think, that I have bent by changing the pressure on the finger. So changing the pressure on the finger here will change the filtering that the finger provides. And when changing the filter cutoff, we also changed the phase a little bit, and I suspect this is why I can modify the pitch like in a bending sort of way. Then there's more interesting things happening over here, and we go back the same way that I came. And something that I very much would like your input on is, would it be possible to implement this kind of view in combination with the topographical layout of the plate? And also, of course, we might discuss if it's even useful to make maps like this at all. And for me, it hasn't been about a scientific overview of what the plate is, but like also a training help when trying to figure out the instrument. So yeah, that's basically what I wanted to share with you. So I'm open for feedback now.
I just asked everybody to unmute their mic, and I think we've all been saving it up. We need to give a big round of applause for that performance. Awesome. Really beautiful.
Thank
So,
you.
yeah, I really love that. And I was thinking of so many different, I wish I could feel like the pressure changing and then the actual, because you're in contact with the vibrations, it's resonances of all sorts. Your body is part of that. So many interesting things. I had a really kind of almost a dumb question, but I just wanted to kick off a discussion with like, is it even possible to like flip it around? Could you put the actuator on the finger and really like vibrate your body and then put the piezo on the plate? And would that change everything? Probably. And have you ever thought of that?
Actually, I didn't think of that. That's a nice idea. It's it would be a little more clunky since the transducers I use are a little bit big.
Oh, that's a bit too big for mounting on the hand.
So, and then I wouldn't actually be in so neatly physically in touch with the nuances of the vibration.
True.
But it's definitely something to try because the position of the transducer, of course, changes.
Well, they make smaller like bone conducting things that are meant for, maybe you could do something with that. Just it would be and different ones on different fingers even. I don't know.
Yeah, good idea. Good idea.
I don't know. So much exploration in this kind of research. It's all worth trying. It's fascinating stuff. Anybody else? Just unmute your mic. We don't have to. Oh, there's lots of hands up. Paula, I guess you were at the top of the list for me anyway.
Okay, thank you, and apologies for bad sound. I'm traveling and enjoying this wonderful performance. Thank you, Øyvind. So you asked, is it even meaningful to do these maps? And I would say definitely yes. And I think it feels sort of the same, even though it's not totally correct, and it may not be correct the next time. And you actually had the transducer in a different position right now, didn't you? It wasn't in the center. But it's still just like when we are toying with models, which are always simplifications. They're not there to give us answers, right? But they're there to give us understanding of the systems and of the parameters and the dynamics. So we understand more of, okay, how it actually changes, the nature of the change and the nature of the interaction. And even though it's not exactly correct once you moved your transducer or maybe just in a different temperature and in a different room, it's still meaningful to have this experience. And I think it's an excellent way to sort of map the solution space or one solution space, and that will teach us something about the nature of this kind of instrument.
Yeah.
How appropriate.
Cool. Thanks, Paul.
I guess Thijs, you're next.
Yeah.
Hi. Yeah. I got a little bit of feedback here. Anyway, I've had the pleasure of seeing this work up close. I was part of this residency that I even mentioned in this first presentation, and I've also visited Øyvind's studio on my way back and seen a little bit of the work on the maps. And I was kind of thinking a little bit further on the maps. I work with a lot of chaotic movements as well, and at a certain point, I've kind of realized that I'm less sort of concerned with what pitches happen, and more concerned about the kind of transitional shifting of phase between one pitch and the next pitch. So in kind of a linguistic way, it's not being that concern with what is being said, but how it's being said. So how does a frequency collapse into another frequency? How is the transition between these sort of pitch locations. So one pitch might be here, the other pitch might be there, but how do you transition from the one to the other? And I was kind of wondering if you've been thinking about whether it will be possible to create a map that's kind of explores not just the content of pitches, but the sort of phase shifting or the kind of the shifting nature of it. I think you're already kind of going in that direction with the more sort of complex material present in one location. But yeah, so perhaps not just what pitches are there, but how they relate to each other.
Yeah, totally. I agree. This would be exciting, and this is also what still puzzles me. And maybe the for me the pitch class names that I put on the map also helps me. I mean, even if they are quantized to 12 tone to the 12 tone system, it's much easier to think of. There's an octave and a third than some hertz number relationship, and then figuring out how different pressure produces these changes. Yeah.
Nice. Any more questions for Øyvind? I'm sure we're going to get lots of good discussion at the end of this too. So even though
Maybe
there's
one comment.
yeah, Pelle?
So I think, Øyvind, I'm not sure if you actually asked why it's going up in pitch when you pressed harder. I mean, when you showed that sonogram. I was thinking that if you actually press harder, you might induce a kind of enforced node on the vibrations in the plate. So it actually goes into a different behavior, and that's why you would shift up. You force that point to be sort of, instead of inducing vibrations there, you sort of, well, it will still vibrate because you're connected in some way, but you actually force it to be a bit more still, and it changes the dynamics of the plate, if you see what I mean. Just
Yeah. At first, this is what I thought was happening, but then I realized if I take only the transducer and push my finger against it, I also get this very clear pitch bend. So without no plate on it, and that got me guessing. And I discussed with the acoustics colleague Peter Svensson, and he mentioned this the influence of phase, of course, on feedback. So if you change the phase slightly, you will actually shorten the wave a little bit, just like we do with the fine tuning of Carplus Strong models. So I'm not sure, but maybe currently I think that's what's happening.
Should we move on then, or what's the? All right. Thanks again, Øyvind. Let's give him another hand, and then we'll come back at the end. So let's see. I think if we're ready, we've got Ruth and Joe, and I need to ask them to go ahead and you've got your screen sharing on. I need to pin their view, of course, and then the audio I should take from Chris, your computer, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. So let me see here. I gotta go. First, I'm gonna mute everyone, and then I will unmute just Chris.
Can you hear us okay?
Yes. Mute myself.
Okay. Not sure if Dan's frozen. Right. So, well, a quick introduction then. We're really happy to have a Semiconductor here. They just had their Halo installation on campus, and okay. Well, okay. Yeah. I'll hand over to you.
Okay, fine. Hi. Yeah, we're Semiconductor, Ruth and Joe. So thanks for having us here today. We are going to talk about our artwork, Halo, as you can see in this image here, and we recently exhibited it as part of Brighton Festival in the UK on the University of Sussex campus at the Attenborough Centre for Creative Arts in May 21. And it was developed as a result of an artist residency that we did at CERN, the European Laboratory for Particle Physics. In 2015, we were there. And then in 2018, we were lucky enough to be able to realise this ridiculous idea. And it was commissioned by Audemars Piguet for an art festival in Basel called Art Basel. So today we're going to try, it's the first time we've talked about the work in this way, we're going to try and unpick the making of it. So the story behind us developing the work, and then also some of the technicalities behind the work. We're also going to introduce very briefly a couple of pieces of other work so that you see Halo in the context of our larger body of artworks.
You might just need to put the mics up a bit.
Okay, so Halo is a 10-meter cylinder with an entrance and exit on either side. It's with 360-degree projection. It has 384 piano wires at 4 meters high, and it's made. The sound and the image are both made from data from CERN, from the Atlas experiment. It's all been pre-rendered and the MIDI has been recreated. So
sorry, Joe, just interrupting for a second, it sounds very quiet.
Okay.
We're just moving the mic closer.
Okay. Is that better? If we talk a bit louder, or is that too loud talking?
I don't know if that's
They think that they're hearing this laptop. You got it.
Yeah, yeah. So all the sound is routed to this. These
But I
mics
mean,
are very-
it's definitely, don't scratch that mic. Is that, you hear scratching? No scratching.
We did do a test. Yeah, we did a test earlier.
Thanks.
You can turn on our laptop microphone.
Okay, let's just see.
Here we go. Is that any better? Should we just check in the chat?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, we're good.
Okay.
Okay.
Should we start again? Or
I'll introduce.
Did we get an idea of what we're talking about?
Just quickly.
Should we just carry on, or should we just do a quick summing up of what we talked about
Got the
already?
gist. They said they got the gist.
Oh, okay, got the gist. Brilliant. Fine. Okay, so you
Okay,
go.
so it consists of 60
Oh,
cycles.
sorry, we've got more votes coming in saying please restart.
Oh, please restart.
Yeah.
Okay, let's rewind. Okay.
Rewind.
I'll do like a.
Only 5
I'll
minutes.
stick with you. Yeah.
Take 2.
Okay, right, here we go. So I was saying thanks for having us here today. We're going to be talking about our artwork Halo, which you can see in this image here. And in this image, it's part of an exhibition that we did earlier this year at Attenborough Centre for Creative Arts, which is actually on the University of Sussex campus here in Brighton. We're going to kind of try and pick apart the making of the work. So the idea behind the work, how we came to make it, and some of the technicalities behind the work. And it's the first time we've done this, so hopefully we can get all these ideas across. And then we're also going to talk about, very briefly, a couple of other pieces of our work, so it puts this work in context of our larger kind of body of work as artists. And Joe's just going to describe the work a little bit.
Yeah, so Halo is a 10-meter cylinder made of 384 piano wires that are 4 meters high, and it has a 360-degree projection that so that the sound and the image are both made from data from CERN, which we've taken 60 events which happen at the speed of light. So there's something like 100,000 events being recorded a second at CERN, but we've only taken 60 of these and reanimated them and put time back into them because they're recorded at the speed of light. It happens instantly. So we've taken this and slowed it down to an experience that you can be immersed in. Yeah,
okay, and we're going to go into more detail about all those things as we go through. Okay, so we're just going to show a short video documentation. So we've been working together as Semiconductor for more than 20 years, making mostly moving image and installation works where image and sound work side by side. And we were initially driven by an interest in the material nature of the physical world and how we as humans experience that. And we were specifically interested in matter that exists beyond the limits of our perception. So we naturally turned to the tools and the processes and languages of science and technology as initially as a way to reveal these things to us. But it was during a residency that we were doing at a NASA Space Sciences Laboratory in Berkeley in California, and Janet Lumen, who's a solar physicist, said to us, you know, science is a human invention, it's nature that's real. And so we felt that this gave us a license to start questioning the process of science a bit more and start asking more philosophical questions around it. So through this, we became interested in the human signature in science and how that influences how we experience nature or mediates the nature, and also suggests the presence of a human observer. So this is a piece of work called Earthworks that we made in 2016, and we worked with the scientific technique of analog modelling, which is they take, it looks like a glass fish tank, and they put in colourful layers of sand, and by applying different types of pressure, they can simulate tectonic activity. And so you end up with all these undulating waveforms, and they can quite accurately replicate landscape formation over thousands of years. So we took this as a visual technique and then created a visual system in an animation program. So we created, with millions of points, a system where we could then bring in sound and reanimate the system. And the sound that we worked with was seismic data translated into audio directly. And we worked with seismic data of Earth forming events. So we worked with earthquake data, glacial data, volcanic data, which the scientists thought was magma moving around inside the volcanic chambers. And then we also worked with data that had been collected from the quarry. So we took that to kind of represent the Anthropocene and this shifting, modern day shifting landscape, man changing landscapes around him. And we then used that as both the sound, so you listen to this, and then it also affects the animation. So it starts off very flat, And then gradually over time, you end up with these undulating waveforms. By the time you get to the quarry data, which is kind of, it's almost like white noise in places, you just end up with this very visually noisy environment. And we have another minute documentation of this piece installed at Sonar Festival in 2016.
So our work is always playing around with the relationship between sound and the image. And so in that piece, obviously the image is made from the sound. We use the seismic data as layers of sound, which then animates and controls different layers of the landscape. And in this piece of work, Black Rain, we worked with some scientists approached us, have seen some of our other work. And the scientist said that I have this data from a satellite called Stereo satellites that were looking at the solar wind. And they offered to work with us to help turn this data into a piece of artwork. So we decided to then use the image to make the sound. So actually, in a way, it's the opposite kind of process. So we sampled parts of the image to make the soundtrack. We'll just do a very even shorter excerpt here. This is the installation version, which works as a kind of waterfall with solar wind. But on our website, there's a single channel film which has a more dynamic soundtrack. And I think one thing I wanted to say here was that when we first started out as Semiconductor, we were just making sound and music. Making films evolved out of that. And we were interested in the idea of Semiconductor came about, where we were first getting our hands on computers. This is in the early 90s. And we were in a constant battle for the aesthetics of computer. It was trying to digitize, aestheticize our work. We were trying to control it and humanize the computer. The Semiconductor was this idea for us that there was a feedback loop of us fighting computer and computer fighting us, and in a way it's a third member of our group. Yeah. We're just pointing out to me that so Black Rain really for us, what was interesting was how the raw data that the scientists would normally throw away was telling more of the story about what was happening than the normal kind of cleaned up, artificially colorized data that you see on typical NASA images. So this raw data has the artifacts, it has things like comets going by, and we made a previous piece of work called Brilliant Noise, which was also looking at the sun, and all of the stuff that the scientists normally remove so that they can have a clean scientific product was actually, not only was it part of the beauty for us, but it actually told more of the story about what was really happening in the science. So after we made this film, the single screen version was released online. We were eventually, the regional scientists were contacted by the BBC, who wanted to use parts of their data for Brian Cox's series, Wonders of the Solar System, his first TV series for the BBC. And the scientists said that that's actually Semiconductor's work. They have decided how this data should look, and kept all these, this quality, and that you need to ask them if you can use their work. And so in the end of the TV series, we actually got credited above NASA. It was very interesting how, in a way, we shaped the way that the public then started seeing scientific data, not as this scientific product, but actually as just this window into nature itself that wasn't kind of sterilized and cleaned up. So a lot of our work deals with that.
Yeah. So, yeah, we have a long history of doing residencies in different scientific laboratories. We're always interested in physical matter. That seems to be our thing. We're interested in matter and how we experience that, our relationship with it. And so we've spent time, like I said, the Space Sciences Laboratory in Berkeley. They were very much looking at the sun and the earth and magnetic fields and interplanetary magnetic fields. We went on a whole journey on that. That was in 2005, and then since then we've spent time in mineral sciences laboratories as part of the Smithsonian National Museum of Natural History. We've spent time in the Galapagos Islands as part of a Gulbenkian Galapagos artist residency, and things like that. So in 2015 we went to CERN as artists in residence, and so they are the European Laboratory for Particle Physics based in Geneva. And for us, it's very much a research process. So we don't go to these residencies. And I know it's become much more normalized these days, that residencies expect you to go there and you have a particular idea that you go with, and then you develop that idea. But for us, it's really important that these are research experiences, because we want to go and have a really good nose around and try to see if we can learn about the science from behind the scenes. So we don't want to learn about the products of science, as Joe was saying. We want to learn much more about the process. So because we treat it like this, it can be quite terrifying going into these environments, because most of the time we purposefully kind of out of our depth. We're trying to remain quite naive about the science that's carried out. But over time, we've become quite accustomed to throwing ourselves into these environments and learning to kind of trust that process of the research that we're doing and the lots of stupid questions that we're always asking the scientists. So when we were at CERN, we spend a lot of time knocking on doors, inviting ourselves into different places, generally becoming detectives, and we have some specific themes that we're interested in, exploring the matter, and then trying to look at the languages and the technologies and tools that they're using to understand the matter they're studying. So in this instance, the fundamental makeup of matter. We spend a lot of time walking around the various sites, and you come across weird bits of instrumentation like this sometimes, especially at CERN. CERN's amazing for just coming across old experiments lying around. We also had at CERN what was called our scientific partner, and this is Luis Alvarez-Gón, and he's a theoretical physicist. And he was brilliant for just throwing everything we thought we knew upside down. So he's theorizing about what the experiments can potentially study, so what the universe is made up of, how it exists, and he came to show us that this process is very plastic, and he really plays around with the language of mathematics as a way to do this. We learned a lot about that from him. And then we also spent time with John Ellis, who's another theorist, and he does things in a very different way. So where with Louis it becomes much more of a performance, and I think one of the last times we went to see him, he said, that's it, you've had all my tricks now, I've given you all my tricks. He was like on this performance thing the whole time. With John, he was very much about trying to teach us about the science and about their processes and languages. We also get to nose around the archives, and Anita runs the CERN archive, and there'd be, here we're looking at some old bubble chamber film, there'd be lots of scientists' notebooks, they donate them to the archive, all sorts of scientific ephemera, and we go in there looking for like the human signature that's present in these processes. Oh, and this is just an example of the type of image. This is originally when they would be colliding particles, they'd be doing it inside a bubble chamber, and they would just take photographs. So you have all this, what Joe is looking at is a strip of film, and each one of those is a photograph when there's a collision inside the bubble chamber. And the photographs, so they can write and catalogue what the photographs are. They would have like these fingerprints inside, which we thought was really nice, this kind of evidence of the kind of human process. We also spent a lot of time in this place, the Large Magnet Facility, or Building 180, where they're constructing prototypes for the new magnets that run around the Large Hadron Collider. And something happened there which was really typical of our experience at CERN in terms of it being this community, that we kind of invited ourselves in, and we kind of met people there, and then they became really interested in what we were doing, and we were doing lots of filming and documenting of all the different processes they were doing. And then very quickly, we became kind of part of their larger team. Every morning they would welcome each other, sort of saying bonjour, bonjour, and handshaking, pre-COVID, handshaking with everybody. And we very quickly became part of that process. So once you're invited to be at CERN, everybody there respects that you have a job that's important to do. So in terms of us, our experience of being there, it was like really amazing, and feeling part of this larger community. We also spent lots of time in the workshop where they create lots of prototypes for the different instruments. And we made another film when we were there called The View from Nowhere, and some of that is on our website. So when we're doing these residencies, we have all these different threads that we're interested in, and we have to do that really, because sometimes they fizzle out. Sometimes you might get really excited about creating an idea, and then you eventually get to meet that person who might make that idea possible, and then they're really not interested in working with you. And so you kind of have to put that idea to bed. So that's one reason why you have to have lots of ideas, but also just for the research process. And so one of the things that we're always really interested in when we go into the labs is looking at the data they're collecting. What type of data are they collecting? Can we work with it in any way? So really, this was the very beginning of the journey of HALO for us. So you have the Large Hadron Collider. So this graphic, this circular graphic that's overlain here, is showing you where the LHC is. It's a 26-kilometre tunnel that sits about 100 metres underground. And then they fire particles around that. Everybody's probably familiar with this, but they fire particles around that close to the speed of light, and then they have collisions. And there's 4 points around the LHC where they have these enormous instruments. And then when they have those collisions, those instruments then collect data from that. So they're interested in studying the fundamental makeup of matter and the forces associated with that. And this is one very visual way that the scientists may represent the type of data that they collect from an experiment. So this is the Atlas experiment. It's called an event display, and the purple cross section of the cylinder you can see there, that is the Atlas experiment, and in real life it's about 20 meters high. And all the orange lines come to meet in the point, so that point is where the collision happens, and then all these particles fly out through the layers of the experiment. So it's like layers of an onion, all these different parts of the experiment, and then they might represent their data. So for example, the green squares that you can see here, the different sized green squares, I think are something to do with the energy in a part of the instrument called the calorimeter. So then they'll represent these very visually. So obviously this is a very quick way that they can look at an image and take from that image what it is that they need to know scientifically what they're studying. But as artists, we're really interested in going back to what we call the raw data. So we want to work with the data, like with Black Rain, we like to work with the data as soon as it's come out of the instrument, so that it hasn't been processed in any way for scientific consumption. and it still holds some of the signature of the technology. Because for us, we're really interested in keeping present the element of man, humankind observing nature, and that does that for us. So it's all very good wanting to work with the data, and then you have to try and find somebody who's going to agree to letting you work with the data. And we were very lucky that we met during our time there a research fellow who again is from the University of Sussex, and we spent a lot of time with Mark Sutton, and he was based at CERN at the time, and he knows the data inside out. And after spending 3 months kind of asking different people if we could work with the data, and then all kind of sucking air through their teeth and not wanting to take responsibility for saying yes, we managed to find Dave Charlton, who used to be the head for Atlas. And since then, we met somebody recently and they said, oh yes, he's a yes man. That's why you've got him to say yes. So we were very lucky that we found Dave and he said we could work with the data. And then it's very much about working with Mark, who went into the archives of Atlas. And it has, the Atlas data is of course collected in a unique format. And so this was the kind of beginning of the process for us to start working and just acquiring the raw data. And at this point, of course, it just exists as lots of numbers. And we had no idea really what that data would kind of look like, what its physical shape would be. And that's kind of what we were interested in. So all of the data that we were working with exists as space points. So they're coordinates in space. So they're points in space. And so we needed to work with Mark to translate them from this unique format. And then we work with our own programmer so that we can import them into our 3D software. So this was just to show an example of the beginning of us bringing these data points into the software and starting to understand kind of some sort of form or other of the data and trying to understand what form that might take. The actual part of the instrument that we worked with for the data is this transition radiation tracker. This is just one part of it. And it has this kind of donut shape. You can see, and it detects electrically charged particles. So the shape that the data takes naturally takes on the form of the technology, which we wanted to keep. We wanted to keep this technological structure. And this was one of the first images that we produced working with raw data from Atlas. So you can see that it mirrors the TRT. And this data hasn't been processed for scientific consumption. So as it exists here, it's no real use scientifically. But we're interested in how this data represents the physical matter or phenomena, but yet without the scientific framework, it becomes just this physical form in its own right. So it becomes an artistic material that we can work with. And this image represents one event. So this is how, so you have a collision that happens close to the speed of light, and then the particles that move through the experiment. And then this is the information that's left behind. So as a particle moves through the experiment, it leaves a signal sort of saying, I was here, I was here, I was here. And then that particle might leave multiple instances where, for example, you see the spirals going around in this image. Now, of course, something that we wanted to do with this was bring time back into it, because we wanted to work with the data in a way that would create an experience of that data. And it's of no use to the scientists to keep the timestamp data in it, and so we had to put the time back into it. So again, we worked very closely with Mark, who kind of just knows the data so well. He works very closely with at the point where the data is collected. And we worked very closely with him, so we had to reanimate all the data points for how they would have moved through the experiment. And in total, we recreated 60 animations. And so this is an example of one of those. And so obviously this would ordinarily happen close to the speed of light. And we've slowed this down, and they get played out so that we get to experience them in a human time frame. So what we're interested in with producing these in this way is that as a viewer, you naturally start to try and look for patterns in the data. And so this will play out, and then in the installation it plays out and then disappears again, and then you have the next unique animation playing out, and it comes down again, and you sit there and you kind of get engrossed in this, and you're comparing the pattern making. And we were really pleased that you ended up with these spirals in there. We didn't know whether we would or not in the data that we were working with, because it helps you to kind of read. We found out, was it loopers, I think they're called? We found out recently when we were talking to one of the scientists, they call them loopers. And so this was the prototype made for the TRT, and it also helped to inform the kind of sculptural form of the installation, because inside each of these straws that you see here, there's 300,000 straws, and inside each one is a copper wire. And so we kept on seeing all these different particle detectors. So at the beginning, when there was the car and then that instrument, that was like an old particle detector. And you can put your head inside that and you can see all these masses of copper wires. And we always thought they were these really beautiful objects, just these masses of copper wires. There's something really fascinating about them. And we always thought we might work with them in a very sculptural way. And we were trying out all these different ways of working with the data, always wondering kind of where is sound going to come into this? You know, we always had this sound relationship. And then at some point it became really obvious that those strings, we would be using those to make the sound. And then that's when all our problems began, when we came up with this ridiculous idea that we were going to make sound. That's somewhere along the line where Haldor came in. We'll talk about that in a minute. Yeah, so, you know, for us, we're not trying to illustrate, by you incorporating these elements of the machine and keeping the structure, we're not trying to illustrate the instrument, but we want to give a sense of the technology and that hardware, and that you're in amongst something that's kind of high tech when you're inside the installation. So it's kind of giving that vibe. And then Joe, you're going to talk about the sound side of things a bit now.
Yeah. So so Halo was fabricated in Brighton by a company called Millimeter, and Ash on the left here was the main person that designed the engineered the sound side of it and the electronics. He produced custom electronic circuits for it. And Haldor advised us, who's watching this in the background, gave us feedback on the feedback. It was a discussion that a small number of us were involved in, where we really wanted to think of a way of creating a system that you could experience the idea of particles in space and waves, points and waves simultaneously, but also playing around with the idea of quantum field theory, which is the idea that particles and waves also exist within an underlying field of energy. So for us, the feedback was the idea that this final element where events in space would then leave traces of what was happening around you. So Halo was made of 16 modules. We designed it so that it was just about transportable. Each of these has 24 piano strings, 4 meters long, and they come in partly pre-assembled. So as I mentioned before, there's 384 piano wires, but there's 256 of these have hammers. First off, we lay out a base structure that supports and holds it all together, and then the uprights are loaded in from the top. These take about 4 or 5 people per module just to lift them and place them into the uprights. Then comes in the sound boxes, and these have 4 speakers per module, which are part of the feedback system. and then create an acoustic space within the central halo, so that the speakers are pointing out and they are attached to the wires, which I'll explain more in a moment. So finally, when the boxes go in, we can put a sound bridge in that then pushes and tensions the wires so that we decided not to tune the wires. We wanted the wires to have their own acoustic frequency. Part of, for us, the vision of sticking with the raw data was that we wouldn't deliberately tune it to have a kind of anthropomorphic idea about what the data should sound like. So we didn't want any particular notes, it just sounded like the machine. But piano wires are incredibly strong. The whole structure would actually start pulling itself inwards as soon as we put the bridges in, because they're so strong. You can also see here bass guitar pickups. And finally, the speakers are all attached via a rod back to the strings with a spring, so that there was enough movement so that the whole machine wouldn't shake itself to pieces. I'll explain a bit more about the system in a minute. So here is the data. So once we converted it into 3D space points in 3D program, we then created an animation of those points as exported it into a MIDI format, which was then played in Ableton. So we had Ableton sending out the MIDI notes to all the modules, but also synchronizing the video to the MIDI. This MIDI was then sent to Arduinos that existed in each module, which then talked to custom circuit boards, which were all hidden underneath the sound boxes. So these circuit boards, part of them talk to the solenoids, which were striking hammers that would play each of the strings. So playing, they were receiving the raw MIDI data, then converting that to energy via solenoids which were hitting the strings. These were then being picked up by bass guitar pickups. So all 24 strings were then coming back into the system and being listened to and then controlled via a preamp, which was then, we had a certain amount of filtering if we needed to do a lower high pass on it to control how much energy was being listened to within the system. And finally, we had, this allowed us to control the sensitivity, because there's so much variation within the system that we had to actually be able to control the input and the output. Finally, this would then go to an amp, which would then drive the speakers, which were attached to the wires. So the feedback system was started off by the MIDI data playing the information, playing the data, and then you would see and hear the sound being struck and the points of light. But then after that was played out, you would then have the sound of the strings vibrating, leaving an echo, a trace of the data. So there's a close-up of the pickups and the strings and the bridge and the hammers. Didn't think I've missed this.
Blah, 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 blah.
So as I mentioned, we didn't design the actual hardware system, so this is why I'm catching up with myself.
Yeah, and Haldor might be able to input some things that we've missed.
Yeah.
So yeah, we were just going to play another video documentation of when it was at ACCA. In between showing it in 2018, which was the first exhibition at Art Basel, and so we had a year to make it. So we came up with this stupid idea, and then we had a year to basically experiment and realise the whole project. So it was kind of quite cramped that time, and obviously there was lots of problems and technical issues along the way. And so then that was shown in 2018, and then just this year, and it was meant to be last year, it was this year, we had 2 more exhibitions of the work, and in between that time we actually developed and took the sound side a lot further. It was a lot closer to what we wanted it to be, to have a lot more control kind of over the feedback system.
So in one way, it's you know, it's an artwork, it's an installation, an immersive environment. But it also becomes a piece of architecture because it's so large, and it's like 10 meters by 10 meters. But what we started to think about it being an instrument that was being played by people.
Yeah, let's wait.
Yeah.
Because we'll just play this video just to remind you.
Hard to hear with the sound on the documentation, but so the events happen quite slowly, and then there's space at the end of each cycle for the sound of the feedback to then sing, and it reverberates for, you know, like 20-30 seconds after each cycle.
When it worked the best for us, it was always at this point where it was almost out of control. It was kind of getting quite noisy and feeding back. So it was always, we always wanted it, so it was almost tipping into chaos. And each event, of the 60 events, each one had its own signature, and you know, we got used to, you know, listening to the whole thing over and over again, and you could hear the same events being played out. They would sound the same, but each one sounded different. So it was interesting how the machine was actually recreating the sound of this, you know, Big Bang data. And so, so when we showed it at ACCA this year, we were really lucky. COVID kind of gave us more time than we would have had in installing the work. So it meant that we were able to connect with people here at the University of Sussex and invite them in as musicians who we know who already work in this way, and to come and experiment with Halo. So it's a way that we've always, from the beginning, we always thought there was potential for musicians or sound artists to come and play with Halo, to see where it can go, to see what it can become, so it becomes a performance space. So we have a couple of videos here of Alice and Chris when they were experimenting with it. And so this was really just a test pilot for us just to see, so that the next time we show it, we can try and build in an opportunity for people who work in this way to come and spend a bit of time, do a residency and develop a performance with the work. So that's our intention. So we'll just play a couple of these videos. That's me. I'm sure it's just
So we learned that we could play it, as a MIDI triggered keyboard, or just actually as a huge feedback loop, where the thing would be playing itself, sound coming in and out from one side would be echoing, with the other side. There's lots of potential for us to develop, more ways of playing with it.
Mm.
We didn't start out thinking of it being an instrument, but it's becoming one as we play with it more.
Yeah, that's us done. Thank you.
Thanks.
Very, very nice. Let's unmute everyone. I guess I can ask them to do that and just jump straight into some questions and some great work to talk about here. So really amazing. So, and it's good to see that you've actually let people come and try it in various ways, bow the strings. And I wish I was you, Chris or Alice, to get my hands on it and try it out. Just, yeah, go ahead and unmute your mics and let's jump into some discussion.
Can I go?
Sure, go ahead, Hauser.
I have a really unfair question because it's Ruth and Joe, because it's for Chris or Alice, whichever one is closer. How was it to play that thing? Does it feel like an instrument or?
Yeah, what a real pleasure it was to play Halo. We had a really good time, and it was rewarding on a number of levels. Thinking about playing a really big shared instrument like that was really quite profound. And playing such a large scale instrument, there's so much detail in the sounds, and it had, I guess, it really felt kind of larger than life, that you're a kind of small input into this really big, complex system, and then you kind of get involved, and then it just run away in itself.
We needed 16 musicians.
Exactly, yeah. Yeah, so it's got this huge potential for getting lots of people playing it at once. I'll say to Alice.
Yeah, I think that shared thing, and also the kind of exploratory thing that we've talked a lot in feedback musicianship about having to really, and I've had some good debates with people about whether it really is unknown or whether you just haven't learned it yet. In this sense, just the novelty, basically just even having a massive string, even that by itself, step one, here's what was it, 5 meter, 4 meter?
Yeah.
Here's a 4 meter string. So like Øyvind's been mapping the notes, as a string player, you know that there's a harmonic in the middle, but you can't necessarily reach the middle. So even like that thing of being able to play and then bow in the same space with no bridge, just a single string is like super engaging. And then the mix. So Chris and I were both bowing. We don't know how much detail we went into. There's what, 3 strings coupled into each?
4. Yeah.
4 strings coupled into each feedback node. So you've also got that going on, and then only the number of the strings on the same frame. So Chris and I playing on the same string could also slightly affect each other. And then Joe was also playing, adjusting the MIDI as we were playing, right? So yeah, it's super fun, and thinking about the choreography, the physical, spatial bit of it. You wanted to have, like you say, 16 musicians, and the makes use the physical space, and then it was just like such kind of high performance potential, wasn't there? The physical movements of it. So yeah, it definitely felt like an instrument.
Cool.
And I'll just add that it just felt really amazing just being able to experience it like that as well, because as an audience member, say watching the performance, you could be in the middle and then you have the sound all around you, so it becomes this surround sound experience as an audience.
Okay, I'm going to tack onto it. Sorry for hogging space. Is there any sort of like potential for like a permanent home or anything, or is that like?
Not yet.
I think permanent home.
You've got the money.
Yeah. We are, it is a crazy beast of a thing.
Yeah.
And we did it,
Yeah.
It was complicated, and we have a team now that we understand how we all work. So that's really important, you know. You know, and we're trying, at the moment, we kind of go, people are interested in the UK, we're kind of sticking to the UK, they're interested in showing it again. So we'll see, and they're interested, then people who we talk to are really interested in the potential of bringing musicians in. So that's like a real winner for them. So yeah, we'll see. You know, we're trying. We're working hard, Howdell. We're working hard.
Yeah.
If you have any Greek or Icelandic philanthropists who'd like to build a geodesic dome,
We'll keep our eyes open.
Okay, I have a question too. So first, I just want to thank you. It's some amazing works and big envy from my side, because I would love to work in those kinds of environments. Envy in a good way, of course, and I would love to experience this sort of in a more immersive way than on a small screen. I have a question more from a sort of visualization notification point of view. You mentioned that you didn't want to tune the strings, and you sort of the argument was that, I don't remember exactly, but you had an argument about it, and sort of not tuning them, doesn't that just change it to be a sonification of the actual construction process? It doesn't become random, but it actually sonifies something else.
Well, it means that when you listen to the data being played out, that you have something that hasn't been preconceived as a way you should hear it. So your brain then interprets that in a way of constructing what's going on with the data, rather than it becoming a piece of music. So it's the difference between, you know, in some sense, between sound and music. It's one of them is that you're hearing the event, and one of them is that you've got someone's idea about how you should hear it. You know, and it's, for us, it's because we're trying to recreate something in nature. We want to leave out as much human prescribed idea as possible. So that's our argument.
Yeah, and so we called it like the natural resonance of the sculpture. But of course, then that was really defined by the first place that we could install the work, defined how high that could be, which of course then defined how long the strings would be, which defined the type of sound that we would get from that. So there were already kind of limitations on that. But we kind of went with that because when you're at CERN, you get all these interesting kind of facts thrown at you, different places. And one of them was specifically to do with kind of scales, the limits of scales that they have to work with at CERN. So obviously the Large Hadron Collider is the biggest experiment in the world, but the length of the size of the experiment got dictated by the length of the magnets that they could make, which got dictated by the longest length truck you can take on European roads. So everything starts getting defined within this kind of human scale and human living and the scale of the earth. And they often talk in that way. So there are things that control.
Any instrument we would make for this would sound like the instrument. So no matter whether we tuned it or not, it would still sound like the instrument. So for us, it's just about leaving out the human as much as possible.
But it's still tuned by somebody. Somebody tensioned the string to some degree. So
yeah, but not to a pitch, just to something that was.
And also, I think, because the sorts of tensions that we would have required to be able to do that would have been too much. There was already, as Joe mentioned, like so much pressure on the structure. And anything, I think when we were with Howdell, we tried doing some tuning that we were thinking with Thor. We know that Thor's really interested in this tuning. We thought that could be one angle where musicians come in and try to tune it. Might be quite interesting. But any time you tuned it, it kind of would detune itself really quickly.
You tune one string and the next string would detune because the tension for such a huge expanse of wire just immense.
You just couldn't get
it already, weighs like 5 tons or something. Even heavier to
so it's just our artistic endeavour, I think, in all of our work. We're trying, like with the works that we talked about today, we'd rather that people don't go into the exhibition knowing what it is. So they don't need to know that it's CERN science and particle physics. We'd rather people could go in and try and experience something as raw as possible. So we're trying to kind of unknow things, because it's very much just about then how we experience. But that's a whole other conversation. But yeah, so that's part of our reasoning for trying to undo lots of our kind of human input.
Thank you.
Dan, if we're moving into more general discussion, should we switch the recording on?
Yeah, let's do that. I'll go ahead and stop the recording, and then we can, of course, open the floor up for both Øyvind and Semiconductor. But let's first give a last hand to Semiconductor. Thanks, Joe. Thanks, Ruth.